we play a game.
But the next thing, I think this gets a little bit more towards the themes of the show. And again, people that listen to this, if you haven't seen Leftovers, I'd really strongly recommend that you watch the show. It's only 3 seasons. It's like 10 episodes, and then 8 episodes?
Yes.
So there's only 28 episodes of the show. So it's really not a huge time commitment. It plays a lot with ideas of whether or not everything can be easily explained as just a random act of science that we can't really understand because we don't really understand the universe completely, or if it's some sort of other sci-fi, religious, biblical, end-of-world situation where the characters are really acting like prophets, trying to prevent the end of the world, all this stuff. And I think that it plays with those ideas because it's how people try to make sense of the unknowable, which is one of the big points of human existence, is to try to find the meaning of life. And it's hard sometimes to understand that when you start to have, why does bad things happen to good people? Why does a tornado run through a town and destroy everybody but your house? And I think relating to this is, do you think when Nora tells the story in the last scene of the show, and then super spoiler for the show, she tells a story that she did go through this radiation producing machine, and it sent her to another world where she eventually found her children, and she saw that the children were okay, but she also understood that this world that they go to is where the 2% of the people that were originally together with the other 98% of the population. Her big line that I think is very powerful there is, we lost 2% and our world went crazy. Can you imagine what they did? They lost 98% of people that they knew around the world. In this world, her children and their father and another woman still formed a family and found connections in that world, and she didn't want to interrupt that, so she never even talks to her children. She just goes to the person, Denziger, who made this machine, has him build another one, and she comes back to Kevin's world. Like, that's the story that she tells. And there's debate, if you want to go on the internet, or if you talked about this already, is this real? Did she actually go to this place? Because we don't visually see it. She just tells it in this really beautiful monologue. Joel, do you think it's real? Do you think what she's telling is right? Or does it even matter? Like, I think that's an important way how you interpret this show. I don't think you have to feel one way or the other, but how do you think about it?
Well, I mean, I don't think it matters because she believes it to be true and he believes her. So there's this kind of connection, and, the show ends with them kind of holding hand, or he reaches out his hand, takes her hand, and they kind of pan out. So it's, it's reflecting on, regardless of whether it was true or not, they gave meaning to it, much like lots of other aspects of the show. But, I mean, personally, when I was watching it, there was nothing to give me reason to doubt what she was saying. And if there was anyone who was going to be like a truthful, as truthful as possible, it would be Nora, as opposed to, a Matt or someone like that. I guess maybe Lori. I don't know. I also felt like near the end, like Lori was also kind of a skeptic or truth teller, to say, even though she had her run-ins with the cults, I felt like afterwards, when it came to Kevin's, mental issues and whatnot, she was the one who was willing to kind of go the distance and say, no, there's a reasonable explanation here. So when I was listening to her, and, she gives a really good performance in it.
Great performance, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't see anything that would make it suggest that she was creating it in her own head, or she knew it was false and she was deliberately lying, etc. It didn't occur to me, frankly, because it just, to think that it was a hallucination or something like that, in the way they did it, it just didn't. It seems kind of counter to like the thrust of the setting and the context and everything and the mood. So I guess there was like the one kind of factual, super critical aspect where I thought, well, does that mean that she went all the way back to Australia to run the machine again? Because obviously she is in Australia again. So the idea is that, but I guess we don't know where she showed up in the other realm.
Well, I think she says that she was in
It was
Australia,
in a parking lot.
that she has to make her way back to New York. Then she finds Denziger and has him build a machine. I guess I would assume somewhere, maybe not necessarily in Australia, but she finds him somewhere.
Right. So there's obviously an implication that she reappeared in our Australia again because she's in Australia. So
At some point,
I guess
she didn't necessarily have to like get zapped into Australia, but she made her way back there.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess she could have been in the United States and traveled back to Australia, but I think the implication was that she showed up back up in Australia because, like, why would she have gone back to Australia if that's not where she just reappeared? There was no evidence. There was nothing to suggest that she was somehow lying or hallucinating. So, I have no problem completely believing. I mean, and people had talked about that before already, so it wasn't like a new concept. Like, oh, there's like a different dimension, a copy of, our world. You can talk to Neil deGrasse Tyson and he'll go on and on about it, which is...
He rants like me. He won't stop talking about it.
Right. So, I mean, I actually like that, the way they gave you some answers, but then they also didn't. And I actually found that completely satisfying. I mean, I wasn't expecting them to give any answers. So the fact that they actually opened up some daylight into, oh, maybe there is another world out there, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's an interesting direction to take it. All right. And then let's get back to, I mean, I know a lot of people were probably watching it wanting answers, or they were pining for, oh, he's going to give us answers. But obviously the end of the show kind of thrusts the characters back into the spotlight, as far as it doesn't matter if she actually did go anywhere.
Lindelof was interviewed after the show was aired, and one of the questions he was asked was, do you know if Nora's lying? He says, I 100% know whether or not she's telling the truth. The interviewer says, will you tell us? And he goes, no, I won't. But I will say that I am surprised by how many people just instantly believed her, that they didn't even think that, oh my gosh, she could maybe not be telling the truth. She could maybe be either lying about the story or just making it up, or maybe hallucinating it or something like that. Because I think for me, I've gone through a little bit of a change since I watched the episode. I think when I first watched it, I said, I'm willing to believe that. That sounds good. But now that the more I think about it, it's more satisfying to me that she didn't do it. That it wasn't even an hallucination. She decided not to go through with it. And because they mentioned a couple times in that episode, the last one that was called The Book of Nora, a book, it would tell a story, and that's what books tend to do. They tell some sort of a story, and she's got these scenes in this episode where she's talking to her associate that's like a nun. The nun works with people who are having weddings or some kind of social event in town in Australia, and they write little love notes on a sheet of paper, and then the nun puts them onto the legs of doves that send out these notes out into the world, and they fly and they send random messages to people, and like acts of love or messages of love. And then what Nora does is she collects the birds when they fly back to their coop, and she just throws the notes in a bucket, and they never really go anywhere. People are just happy to think that whatever they write will get out into the world. They don't really need to know that it's just going to get thrown away into this random bucket. And Nora confronts the nun about this and says, like, this is just a lie. And the nun says the phrase, it's not a lie, it's a story we tell that sounds nice. It's a story that we tell ourselves to make sense. And I think that is if you had to pick one thing that this entire show is about, it's the stories that we tell ourselves to make sense of the world, to be happy about the world. Like, there are compromises that most people need to make with the idea that if you really think about the idea that bad things happen to good people and everything is random and does anything actually matter, we can all become like the Joker in The Dark Knight, where nothing matters and it's just all about, like, there's no good and there's no evil, it's just things that we do. Like, if you start to think about that, you lose maybe a sense of purpose in the world and chaos ensues. I think how people respond to moments of grief, how people respond to tragedy, is essentially a story that they tell themselves. So the Book of Nora, to me, is her finally coming to grips in some way with the idea that her children, wherever they are, if they're dead, if they're somewhere else, they're at least with her husband, right? They're together. hopefully they've been able to move on and form some sort of a life together. And that's something that she just couldn't do herself. She couldn't get back with Kevin. So that's why she's living in Australia, which is the other side of the world, kind of, from where Kevin would be in Texas. She doesn't try to reach out to him. So the season 3 ends with years later. I think it's undetermined amount of time, but it seems like decades later when Kevin and Nora find each other again. So she's been living in Australia for a long time, and she says, "Why?" He asks, "Why didn't you come and find me?" And she says, "Because some time had passed. I wasn't really ready. I didn't know if you would believe me." And I think what she means is that he wouldn't believe her, that she could finally move on from this grief that has been affecting her throughout all 3 seasons. And that was the last thing that he told her was, "You can't get over the death of your children. You need to go be with them." And then he storms out of the hotel room that they were in. And I think she realizes that in that beautiful scene where she's smoking a cigarette while the smoke alarm and the water the fire prevention system is raining on her head. And you see that beautiful shot of just her eyes and the water is coming off of her eyelashes. It's like a beautiful, sad moment. I think she realizes that at that point she hasn't moved on. She says she has, but she hasn't. Ultimately, we see her telling this story, and maybe she believes it, maybe she doesn't. Maybe she's just telling it to Kevin as an explanation. Maybe because she thinks that Kevin is delusional, and this is her way of just kind of making sense of this, and he'll believe it. Or she's just trying to tell, this is just the story that she's told herself. This is the narrative in the book that she's created for herself. And one of the other running things in season 3 is that Matt, the religious leader, is writing a kind of newest testament about Kevin as like a messiah figure, and that's his book. And Nora's book is her story that maybe isn't true literally, but it's a serious story that depicts her character arc.
But the direction is irrelevant, right? I mean, in either case, she moves on.
True, but the show does. There aren't really like a definitive moment. You don't see like a light flash and she gets zapped, right? It cuts away, so there's an explanation. You can say, "Whoa, she could have said stop."
But I'm saying, like, your takeaway is relevant, or is the same regardless of whether she actually did go to the place, right?
I mean, it is, but I don't think it's not as meaningful to me as if she actually saw her children and came to that grips, because it's for her, it's a leap of faith. That's one of the things that the show, another theme for them, is people believing things without necessarily having exact proof for them. And if she saw her children and saw that they were happy, and it's like, fine, okay, now I don't actually need to be involved in this, and I just want to go home, that kind of thing. To me, it's just it's not as meaningful unless she came up with that on her own. But it's not critical. If it turns out Damon Lindelof, like 10 years from now, says, "Oh yeah, by the way, she did go to this alternate upside down world kind of place," I'd be okay. That's fine. To me, it's at this stage, it's more meaningful to me if it didn't happen.
All right.
Strange game. The only winning move is not to play.